to Singapore. Thank you very much and welcome.
President William Ruto, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to everybody.
Good afternoon.
I thank President Ruto for his warm hospitality and his warm words. This is my first official visit to Kenya, and I'm delighted to be here today. Despite being geographically quite distant, Singapore and Kenya have similar outlooks. Our peoples share similar aspirations, such as inclusive growth, a high standard of living, ethnic and religious harmony, and good housing, healthcare, education. We share similar views on the challenges faced by the Global South. We both worry about growing geopolitical tensions, rising protectionism, threats to the multilateral trading system, inflation, pandemics, and climate change. We agreed that it was important that countries continue to work towards building linkages in the digital economy, cooperating on food, energy security, and sustainable development. The President and I reaffirmed the warm and long-standing relations between Singapore and Kenya. 2 years ago, we celebrated our 30th anniversary of diplomatic relations, and our two countries cooperate and exchange experiences in areas such as governance, public service administration, urban planning, and livable cities. Our economic cooperation has been growing. Kenya is one of Singapore's important trading partners in sub-Saharan Africa. Despite COVID, bilateral trade in 2021 increased by almost a quarter year on year. Several Singapore companies are operating in Kenya in a variety of sectors: shipping, logistics and port management systems, agribusiness, hospitality and fintech solutions, amongst others. A delegation of Singapore companies is in Nairobi. They came with me to pursue opportunities for investments and partnerships with Kenyan companies. Our two countries also collaborate well in multilateral fora. President Ruto and I reaffirmed our shared commitment to multilateralism and a rules-based global order. Singapore and Kenya agreed to continue our cooperation at the UN and other multilateral co-organizations, and to cooperate on UN reform to enhance its effectiveness. We discussed new areas of cooperation, first on information and communication technologies. We just signed an MOU in this area, which will allow both sides to exchange best practices and knowledge in ICT and promote talent development and innovations. The MOU will also facilitate and strengthen strategic cooperation in cybersecurity. Secondly, on climate change, we signed an MOU in carbon credits collaboration under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and this will encourage, develop, and facilitate collaborative carbon credit projects of mutual interest. International collaboration, such as this agreement between Singapore and Kenya, is critical to promoting global climate action to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. Third, on human capital development. Both our countries placed heavy emphasis on nurturing talent. The MOU on skills development will encourage closer technical cooperation between both countries in areas such as leadership and governance, education, and digitalization. And this will take place through knowledge exchange, capacity building courses, and other cooperation. There is great potential to expand our bilateral cooperation. Kenya's strategic location serves as a gateway for Singapore companies into East Africa. Likewise, Singapore can serve as a gateway for Kenyan companies into Southeast Asia. I welcome the ratification of the Bilateral Investment Treaty and the President's commitment to settle the avoidance of the double taxation agreement between our two countries as soon as possible. These moves send a strong positive signal to businesses and provide clarity and assurance on the cross-border transactions and investment. I look forward to working with President Ruto and his government to bring our bilateral relations to even greater heights I'm very happy that the President has accepted my invitation to visit Singapore, and I look forward to receiving him before too long, and if all goes well, early next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellencies. We have a few questions from the journalists. Kindly identify yourself and who you are addressing the question to. Thank you. And the media house you represent.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister, President Ruto. I'm Geraldine from CNA. I would like to ask what you think Kenya's value is to Singapore in terms of not just business and trade, but also expanding Singapore's diplomacy in Africa.
Well, economics is, of course, a very important part of any two countries' relations, and between Singapore and Kenya, as I explained, we have good economic ties, and they are growing. But Kenya is also a very important country in Africa. In East Africa particularly, it has a key role, not just as the hub and as a base from which we can extend our reach to the rest of East Africa, but also a role in the region's security and stability. And Singapore has goodwill in Africa and in Kenya. We have many friends here. It goes back a long way. In fact, in 1964, when we were in Malaysia, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew visited Africa on a tour, and Kenya was one of the countries which he came to, and he called on President Jomo Kenyatta. And we've maintained those ties since, and it is important to Singapore that we cultivate friends and partners all over the world, because in the global scheme of things, we are all quite small countries, and small countries need to make common cause with one another on issues which concern us all, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's climate change, whether it's nuclear non-proliferation, or the sanctity of the UN Charter and the inviolability of international borders, which was what was at stake when Russia invaded Ukraine. And therefore, it's important for me to visit Kenya and to be in Africa and to show that this is important to us and that we would like to develop our relations with our friends further.
Okay. Next question.
Prime Minister Lee and President William Ruto, I'm Sydney Chazima from NTV.